We're celebrating an important week in our system of self-government. This week is known as Sunshine Week. For the last 14 years, advocacy groups, good government watchdogs, and media organizations have joined forces to observe the importance of transparency and freedom of information. With transparency and freedom of information is important for that transparency, you have more accountability in government. As a longtime champion of an open, accessible government, I speak today in support of those enduring principles. Sunshine Week coincides each year with March 16th. That's the day one of the nation's founding fathers and fourth president of the United States was born. That person is James Madison, widely known as the father of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. From his writings in the Federalist paper, you might say he was the architect who framed our system of checks and balances. Madison believed all powers of the government are derived of, for, and by the people. And that is what brings me to the floor today, Mr. President. The public has a right to know what their government is doing and how the government is spending the taxpayers' dollars. What's more, the American people owe a debt of gratitude to our fellow citizens who bravely come forward, often at great professional risk, to report wrongdoing in government. We ought to expect that out of the government employees or any fellow citizen that knows something is wrong. So I'm here today to talk about a ray of sunlight coming from the Defense Department. More specifically, I want to alert you about the Whistleblower Hotline managed by the Office of Inspector General, and once in a while, good news out of that department. Now, I spend a lot of time and effort on government oversight. Congressional oversight is part of our constitutional assignment to protect the power of the purse and ensure that the laws that we pass are faithfully executed. My sights are set quite often on the Pentagon when it comes to oversight. The U.S. military is the strongest and mightiest in the world. Our men and women in uniform put their lives on the line to protect our sacred freedoms. Each of us should be fighting tooth and nail to make sure that they have the resources they need. But I'm not, however, talking about writing blank checks. I'm writing about making sure defense dollars are spent wisely. The Pentagon shoulders a strategic and vital mission for America, but is by no means infallible, not by a long shot. As with most any bureaucracy or corporate organization, its workplace culture dictates that each individual should go along to get along, and that's not how it should be. Institutional foot-dragging at the Pentagon, for example, has hampered efforts to root out sexual misconduct. You read about it too often. And a systemic bookkeeping system has plagued the Department of Defense for decades. Nevertheless, I keep pressing the Pentagon to fix this fiscal mess. Every dollar lost to waste, fraud, and abuse is a dollar that could be put to better use for our men and women in uniform, for better housing, as just one example. I learned long ago that one of the best ways to expose wrongdoing is by listening to whistleblowers. Whistleblowers are the ones who have their noses and ears to the ground day in and day out. They are patriots doing their job of reporting wrongdoing. These patriots know the difference between right and wrong. So when their good conscience compels them to come forward, we should hear them out. And we need to encourage others to do the same. Whistleblowers within the Defense Department help weed out improper payments, procurements, and fraud and other unethical schemes and misbehaviors that come at taxpayers' expense and the expense of military preparedness. As co-founder and co-chairman of the Whistleblower Protection Caucus, I lead efforts from Capitol Hill to strengthen protections and raise awareness for what's often an uphill battle for whistleblowers. In the rigid command of the U.S. military, the civilian workforce and uniformed members of the military are trained to follow protocol and to respect the chain of command. Instead of then receiving a pat on the back for exposing wrongdoing, too many of these whistleblowers face retribution and reprisal. I often say they're treated like skunks at a picnic. So that brings me to the DoD Whistleblower Hotline, a vital conduit for whistleblower complaints. So once again, there's some good news about DoD and whistleblowers and trying to improve things there in a November IG report. It shows a huge backlog of tips has been reduced. You could say it's a glimmer of hope in an otherwise swamp of secrecy. You see, the report also exposes the bad news. The playbook of bureaucratic authority, defend, delay, and deny, is alive and kicking. From fiscal years 2013 to 2018, the IG's office found the number of reports tripled, but it also showed the number of reprisal complaints doubled. The report found that 350 Defense Department officials, most of them in the branches of the armed forces, retaliated against and sought to intimidate 195 whistleblowers. You can't speak about 195 cases, but I'll bet in many cases, many higher-ups in the chain of command would be embarrassed, and that's why it wasn't reported, and that's why these folks were retaliated against. This tells me also that higher-ups who are accused of retaliating against whistleblowers are going unpunished. Consider about 85% of the people who reported wrongdoing and face professional punishment or personal embarrassment are still waiting for any remedy, according to this Inspector General report. This sends a very unsubtle signal to whistleblowers. Blow the whistle at your own risk. When the top dogs who dish out retribution go unpunished, and some are even promoted, the message to the rank and file is loud and clear. Blow the whistle at your own risk. Nearly 2 years ago, I came to the floor of the Senate to sound the alarm on this very subject. At that time, I shared statistics from a 2016 IG report. It listed 406 hotline cases that have been open for more than 2 years. Nobody's in a hurry to do anything about wrongdoing in the Defense Department when things like that can accumulate. More than half of those 406 cases, 246 cases to be exact, had been open for more than 1,000 days, and some had been laying around for 4 years. So back when I gave that speech a couple years ago, I noted that the IG's office wasn't moving the needle, despite increases in personnel and money in the IG's office. The workforce to overload the workforce to overload ratio was mismatched. Cases were adding up, and a corrosive workplace culture within the IG was festering sore. Allegations of tampering with investigations and whitewashing cases were tarnishing the reputation of the premier whistleblower oversight unit at the Pentagon. Congressional watchdogs like myself should not have to watch the Pentagon watchdogs to keep oversight on track. Now, as I said, there's some good news. Things seem to turn a corner when Acting Inspector General Fine recognized these antics of the bureaucracy, a bureaucracy run amok. I'm glad to see a ray of sunlight coming from the IG's office. However, we still aren't yet out of the woods. I want to thank those in the IG office who are toiling to reduce this hotline backlog. However, the DoD needs to step up and face the music. DoD needs to own these failures in letting retaliators off the hook. Failing to hold these folks accountable is a huge slap in the face to those in the department who are performing their responsibilities every day with dedication and excellence, being patriotic people, blowing the whistle, and pointing out waste, fraud, and abuse. But it also happens to be a slap in the face of the taxpayers. And it's telling these patriotic whistleblowers, thanks, no thanks. Feel free to disclose your report. But we may press the mute button after processing the claim. Make no mistake about it, the hotline becomes meaningless if whistleblowers lack confidence in the system. They'll stop calling and stop reporting waste, fraud, and abuse. My advice to Inspector General Fine, put some mustard on it and add some hot sauce while you're at it. Get down to the brass tacks and recommend disciplinary action against those who retaliate against patriotic people pointing out waste, fraud, and abuse. In closing, I'd like to share a tip with the Department of Defense. This U.S. Senator will continue shining the spotlight on waste, fraud, and abuse at the Pentagon and, of course, elsewhere. And I will continue advocating for whistleblowers with every tool at my disposal. As an Iowa farmer, I know what a load of manure smells like. I'm also very aware of why farmers make hay when the sun shines. And there's a good lesson, and that's a very good lesson for good government. Sunshine helps hold government accountable to the American people. And that's why we celebrate Sunshine Week this week and every year now for, I think, 14 years. Because Sunshine Week promotes openness and transparency in government. That's why Congress passed the Physicians' Sunshine Act in 2010. This law establishes a mandatory national disclosure program where drug and medical device manufacturers report payments made to prescribers and teaching hospitals. However, it appears that some parties may not be disclosing this information. That's why, in addition to what I've told you about overseeing things in the Defense Department, it's necessary to call out the HHS and CMS to be forthcoming about whether opportunities exist for us to work together to strengthen the law where all these things aren't being reported as they should be. Sunshine is the best disinfectant.